So the first one is latitude. So this one's really about, if you were putting it into practice, it would be places like comparing London to Glasgow or London to Aberdeen up the north of Scotland, I'd say. And it's just this idea that places that are closer to the sun are warmer. Okay, so they have a lower latitude, because remember the latitude line of 0, it starts at 0, which is the equator, and goes right up to the North Pole and South Pole either end to create this 90-degree angle, 90 degrees north or south, just as like a right angle triangle. Okay, but in really simple terms, right, it affects temperature. So if you look here, the sort of bottom line is where the sun is maybe, looks like it's sort of hitting a more direct approach at the bottom line. That's places along the equator, whereas places in the northern hemisphere are further away. Up here in North Europe, the sun's rays have a longer distance to travel, so it is going to have more chance for the sun's rays to be reflected as it passes through the atmosphere, through like dust particles or clouds, so it's colder. Okay, that's essentially it. With the next one is like relief or altitude. This is like the height and the shape of the landscape. So temperatures decrease by 1 degree by something between 64 and 100 metres in height. So the Scottish Highlands are over 1,000 metres high, making them 10 degrees colder than lowland areas at sea level. Okay, so this is temperature we spoke about so far. Let's think about rainfall in terms of relief. So you also have, it's rainier in mountainous places, because as the warm air rises up over the sea, it cools down and condenses, because the air, when it hits the mountains, it's not absorbed by the mountain. If anything, it's deflected upward, and then as it goes upward and it's colder up in the higher altitudes, because it's colder, that warm air starts to condense and form clouds, and then it rains. And then as it descends on the other side, you get rain shadow, which makes it colder. But this basically describes why Glasgow's rainier than Edinburgh, because as that warm wet air comes from the North Atlantic, it rains in Glasgow, and by the time it reaches Edinburgh, that rain isn't going to affect it, because all the rain's left the clouds from the sky through rain. Okay. Aspect refers to this idea that if a place lies directly facing the sun, like Costa del Sol in Spain, or the south coast of England is like the warmest place in the UK, it's going to be warmer. If you're facing north up to the North Pole, say, and you're in the Scottish Highlands, it's going to be colder and windier. Okay, and even rainfall too. So if I'm high up and I'm next to the water, again, like I said with the relief rainfall, the aspect of like facing, if you're facing a darker, colder area, there's more condensation happening, right? Okay, low battery. Okay, I'm nearly finished. Distance from the sea refers to the location inland or along the coast. So places closer to the sea experience mild and wet weather. If you're further away, it's drier. Now, it can be colder if it's it can be colder next to the sea in summer, because it kind of keeps it a bit cooler, because you get the sea breeze. But if it's in winter, it's warmer because the ocean stores heat longer. It's like I always say, if there's if you have a bit of toast with a cup of tea, the cup of tea is going to stay warmer for longer than the toast, because water's molecular structure stores heat better. So the ocean stores heat better. That's why you can see a snowy place, but the ocean isn't frozen. This allows air to evaporate and come inland and melt the ice. So actually, if you're next to the coast in winter, it's slightly warmer. If it's, let's say for example, we don't talk about California, but if you're in California, it's much cooler in San Francisco because it's next to the ocean, and this is in summer. It's cooler. Whereas if you go inland in California, you start getting into these really warm deserts, places like Death Valley, the hottest place in the planet, you know. So the sea will drastically change temperature depending on where you are. If you're in the middle of Siberian Russia, it's an ice desert, you don't get rainfall, and you're not next to the sea, it just gets cold, you know. Whereas in Scotland, we only experience snow sometimes because the North Atlantic brings wet weather, which is warmer than ice, above freezing temperature. Okay, now what I suggest you do is look at this answer in your PDF of notes in the file section in Teams and use the bullet points to try and memorise a model answer. This question can be out of between 4 and 6, okay? And sometimes it will only ask you about temperature and nothing to do with rainfall. So it's quite important that you know what affects temperature and what affects rainfall, okay? Any questions, you know what to do. You can drop a question in Teams and everyone can see it and we can help one another. Okay.